Hello, puppies and kittens. I am speaking with Ben, who sent me an email saying that he has uh, the last vestiges of belief, is how I think you described it. So, tell me what is your situation, and let's see where we can go with it.
Yeah. So, in terms of background, I was raised very hyper charismatic, evangelical, fundamental, nationalistic Christian. And about 10 years ago, my wife and I pulled away from that specific brand of Christianity. Um, and there's a ton to look back on there and even talk about. But Um, now I'm kind of at this point where I, I guess I thought we had better arguments. I guess like looking deeply into the faith recently, um, and like trying to decide what path I want to take. Honestly, in terms of like career, even because I've considered going to seminary and whatnot, and I'm just finding that our arguments are not great. I thought we had more honestly, I thought we had more evidence. Um, and I keep running up against, in the conversations that I'm having, I keep running up against, like, no, you don't have to just believe based on faith and no evidence. Like, we have a bunch of evidence, and then we talk about the evidence, and then I offer some counterpoints, and then it ends up landing right back at like almost a Pascal's wager type argument, where it's like, well, in the end, it's just better to believe. And I don't know if I can do that honestly. That's kind of the problem I'm having. Um,
Would you
and the
say that?
last,
Did you
yeah,
say that you started this, let's say, quizzical period like a year or so ago, or was it longer?
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on. So I started really, really looking at my views just a few years ago, about 3 years ago during COVID when that all was going down, because I was just watching people just lose their minds and believe absurd things, like very reasonable people, as like aggressively normal people, believing that nanobots are in the vaccine and you can't get, and they're dead serious, like, and you can't get MRIs afterward because it'll rip the nanobots out of your skin, right? Like, it's insane. And so I watched this happening to friends and to family members, and I watched the like the anger and the vitriol and the division, and I started thinking like, man, what's causing this? Like, what it seems to be American Christian conservatives that are doing most of the conspiracy nonsense. And so what is it about those things that is leading to this issue? And I started seeing like, man, we aren't always looking for proof. If we're looking for an answer, whatever answer gets us through to the next crisis, I guess. And it was like every week there was a new crisis on the conservative Christian side, CRT and everything. Like, um, and so I started asking myself, like, is there anything that I believe just because I have been told it, just because it's like a default view that I haven't explored the actual implications of? Because talking with these people, like, they don't see that the beliefs that they have in the political world, in the conspiracy world, they have huge implications that go way beyond what they're saying. But they don't look at that. They don't want to look at it because it disproves what they think, and they've already gotten their answers, so they're comfortable. Um, and so I just started asking that question to myself, and so it started politically, um, and I just allowed myself to watch and listen to a lot of, like, I was in an echo chamber. I was in the, it's embarrassing. I was in the Daily Wire echo chamber. And they told me I wasn't in an echo chamber. So I was like, oh, I'm not in an echo chamber because they said so. But I realized every single view that I had come from people who believe the same thing. and every characterization I had of the other side came through their description, right? And so I started exposing myself to the actual arguments that are being made by reasonable people on the other side, and realizing they're reasonable things, and they're not as, blue-haired crazy feminists as I was told they were. Like, and now I don't care if you're blue-haired, and I hope you are a feminist. Like, I I don't have an issue with it. So I I don't know. I just started trying to be really, really honest about where I'm getting my information and to avoid bias. And so it started with politics, and and then it moved on to science, and like I moved to like global warming specifically, because that was like it's like not super controversial. So like, well, let me see what those arguments are. And I was bored to death. Like, it's hard to learn about global warming, to be honest. But I did learn that there is a legitimate argument. And my questions, like if you had asked me 2 years ago, what do you think about global warming? I would have said, well, how did we get out of the last ice age? There wasn't any factories. And then I was saying, all right, that's all I need to know, right? So, but that's not evidence. That's not proof. That's not an argument. It's a question that has an answer. And I intentionally ignored looking into that answer because there's no incentive to actually believe it when you're surrounded by people who don't, right? So naturally, the progression of all of this and science and learning about the flood, and Erica Gutsick-Gibbon, that was a huge help. Just learning about all these different things, and yeah.
Okay. My thought on why people had issues with understanding or accepting global warming, which what we originally called it. I mean, back in the 70s, we had just understood it as pollution, and of course, we understood that the industries that we have these industrial levels of chemical waste being pumped into our environments, and whole groves of forests being cut down for industrial purposes and so forth,
Right.
and all of the pollution we've done to the ocean, and then the global population. When I was a kid, there was 3 billion people on the planet. And when my grandmother was born, I mean, there was only like 2. And so exponentially, we've gone from the 2 to the 3 that it was when I was a kid, to 4, 5, 6, 7, and now 8, all in the course of my lifetime. When 2 was the record for the most number of people that had ever been alive. So I was able to see how environments change, and how when you have a finite system, you tip the scales by doing all of this in industrial levels, as I said. Then of course, inevitably, you're going to see an impact on the environment. But what I saw was that people rejected this idea primarily, it seemed, because it implied some personal responsibility. And it always struck me that Christianity was a means of evading responsibility for anything. I don't know if you ever saw it as such.
I certainly wouldn't have characterized it that way. And that's where I struggle. I don't know if I would now, because I guess the argument to respond to that would be like, it's about actually taking responsibility. It's actually admitting that you're broken and you're sinful and you've done terrible things. And really, at the end of the day, you're no better than the worst of the worst. All sin is the same, except it's not, but the punishment is the same, I guess. And but then there's like
You're of the opinion. You're of the opinion that that sin has a punishment,
an eternal punishment, like a
well, just you said this, the punishment for sin
yeah.
is the same. What is the punishment for sin?
Right. Well, the argument would be hell, which there's a million interpretations of that. So I'm not concrete on any of this, and I'm increasingly less concrete.
Gotcha. My
So
my thought my thought on the punishment of sin and all of that is that every sin can be forgiven if you but believe.
right,
But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't really matter how evil you are, because every sin can be forgiven. But if you it doesn't matter how good you are if you don't believe, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. So ultimately, then, it's not our sins that are punished, it's our gullibility. Did you believe what you were told to believe simply because you were told to believe it without question, reservation, or reason? And if so, then okay, fine, you get a pass. But if you didn't blindly believe what we told you to believe, then we're going to threaten you with a fate worse than death.
right. Yeah. So I guess what I would have said, and it's part of the hang up that I'm at, is like, what I would have said is that it's unreasonable to not believe. Like, the reason people don't believe is because they don't want to change their behavior. And I don't know if I would have been that dogmatic about it if I had really thought about it, but I didn't think about it. Like, there's no incentive. This is what I'm coming into again and again. If there's no incentive to really look at the things that you believe and challenge them, you never will. You never will, even no matter how absurd they are. My wife and I have been sitting down with a Jehovah's Witness couple. We're not becoming Jehovah's Witnesses for sure. The idea was actually to kind of talk to them out of the silliness of their beliefs. And what I'm watching is someone being confronted with a viewpoint they've never heard, despite the fact that they've held their view for decades. Why haven't they heard it? Why have they not heard it? I'm not a brilliant person. Like, if I can come up with an argument saying that, yes, you should get a blood transfusion and not let your kid die, if I can come up with that argument in 30 seconds and show them the scriptures even alluding to it, like, they should be able to as well. But it just shows me including me, we will just ignore what we just won't even question what we're being told if there's no incentive. Like, there's no incentive for them to change their mind whatsoever, unless they need a blood transfusion, obviously. But, like, looking at that in my own life, I never challenged anything, because why would I want to go against what everyone else in my life believes? It's like a subconscious decision at times, although there's moments where you have this little cognitive dissonance and something doesn't quite make sense, and you're asking a question that feels wrong and feels dangerous, and so you just ignore it and move on to the next thought. And so I started leaning into that cognitive dissonance with the idea that if the question's there, the question's there. Like, if God knows it's there, then I can really try to explore it, right? But I keep coming up a bit empty-handed.
So let me ask you an important question that at some point will become important to somebody. You have these doubts, and I've heard Christians often say that, you have doubts. Of course, you have doubts. We all have doubts. But then when the doubts become such that you realize that the explanations that they're giving you are not factually accurate, that's a problem. Or when they're based on assertions that can't be verified, they can't show you the truth of it. I mean, every religion makes these common claims that that they're the absolute truth and the revealed word of the one true God, even when they can't agree on who the God is, right? Even when they're completely different, even when they're not based on the Bible, not even on the Old Testament, like with Hinduism or Zoroastrianism or whatever. And there's a handful of others. They're all claiming absolute truth, but all of it seems to be just an opinion that somebody made up, and it's like when people make up their own statistics on the fly. So you feel like, okay, well, that nobody can show me that they have any truth to their argument. You can't show me that this religion is any more accurate than all the others, and that's a problem if truth really matters to you. But what I want to clarify here is that these doubts that you're having, whatever they're based on, they don't have anything at all to do with you wanting to sin. Now, do they?
No. Absolutely not. My life will change. Not at all. Not at all.
Actually, it will. It'll surprise you, and it already has. You made mention of it a moment ago. Once upon a time, it upset you whether somebody was a blue-haired feminist, and now you don't care about the hair color or the feminism.
Yeah.
Daniel Dennett, with his wife, was working on a group called the Clergy Project, where they were helping out people who are lifelong clergy. They make their living by being pastors and so forth. But they've seen in recent years where a whole lot of them no longer believe what they're preaching from the pulpit, but they have to keep preaching it because they don't know any other way. You're 40, 50 years old. You've been doing this all your life, and now you don't buy it. So what are you going to go sell cars now?
Right.
So there's an organization that's helping these people. And one of the things that they've noticed is that very often these people come from extremely conservative, politically and socially conservative positions. But when they lose their religious belief, they find that they are more liberal, that they are more tolerant, that the things that used to irritate them don't anymore.
Yeah.
And I think you're already beginning to experience that.
Absolutely. See, but I would separate the political, like I could tackle the political stuff because I enjoy debate. I enjoy different perspectives. But so I could tackle the political stuff and still feel that I can have a faith, a reasonable faith. And in fact, maybe even a more informed faith. And so, but I have found, like, the more I try to understand the argument of the other side, well, it's not really the other side anymore, but the argument of the left, the less upset I am about absolutely everything. Like, it's exhausting to go week after week after week, and it's just the new boogeyman coming. Like, so there's transgenders under your bed, and they're coming for your kids. It's nonsense, and I can't wrap my head around it. It's like you said it, actually, that I think it was really well stated. In order for us to be true, reality has to be wrong. And that's stuck with me because I think it's very true. Because when you have a philosophy that says the world is coming to an end any day now, any 5 minutes now, then you have to believe the world is getting way worse. And then you have to identify what those worst things are. And they're, of course, going to be things you don't understand. And so then, that's how you end up in that world. And you live in this isolated box. And then you homeschool your kids, and then you start your own company. So you're not really exposed to anybody anymore. And it's toxic. It's toxic. And so people will believe more unsubstantiated, we'll just say that, things from a conservative Christian perspective, because at the base level, we don't trust any institution because we can't. Because
I was at a political rally at the Texas State Capitol, and there were some Republican candidates that were talking about what they were going to do to public education. And because the GOP has been after public education for the longest time, trying to divert funds to charter schools and private schools, Christian schools and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so they've been really against mainstream. The reason we have a Republican-led Board of Education was because that was just the first step to undermining public education altogether. Some of the first, or the earliest members, when I became an activist, had written books about how public education is evil and in line with Satan. So these people were against public education, even though they're working for the education system. So one of these Republican rally people were advocating that he acknowledged that Republicans are born into their party, which was an interesting concept for me, and that as a result, they owe their party loyalty, or this is how they feel. And he says, but we have the Republican candidates on the ticket right now, and this was a few years ago, are out to destroy our positions as public school teachers, because this was a teachers' rally. And he said that even though they felt that they had to, vote Republican because they've always been Republican, because they were born Republican, as if that's possible, he said that they had to consider voting for the other party if they wanted to remain public school teachers. And I don't bring that up to talk about what the Republicans are doing against education necessarily, but the notion that you're born into a religion is just as absurd as thinking that you're born into a political party. But these people will hold these opinions not for reasons so much as they were just trained to be against these positions. I gave a presentation in the Idaho State Capitol, wherein I pointed out how people are against feminism and Marxism and humanism and Satanism and evolutionism, as they call it, and a host of other things, that they don't know what any of these words mean. They just know they're against it.
Right.
And it's fine if you're against any one thing, but you should have an idea of what you should be able to define what the thing is. If you're give the reason why you're against that.
That's what I told a friend maybe a year ago. I said I am endeavoring to be able to convince somebody of something that I don't believe in, which is leftist right politics, and I've convinced myself, so I've done a decent job. So I was
tell you
in the hardest
that
place.
My friend Matt Dillahunty, was famous on the Atheist Experience TV show, and he's now doing his own show. But I mean, he's a very prominent figure in the atheist community. But there was a time when he was in the Navy that he met an atheist when he was himself. I think he was aspiring to be a minister at some point in his future. I mean, he was very studied on the Bible and the philosophy that supports religious belief and all of that. And when he encountered this atheist, he was determined to convert that atheist. And so he started reviewing the arguments to do it because, Matt's all about debates, right? So he's studying the debate arguments to take on this atheist. And just like you just said for yourself, Matt talked himself out of Christianity.
Oh, it's uncomfortable. I don't, I want to believe. I really genuinely do. But I also want to be honest. And I don't know if I can be both. And that's what's been really bothersome. I've been fortunate. My pastor, I love him. He's a really good man. And he has radically changed his views in the last 10 years. So I've been fortunate to be able to bounce stuff off of him and be honest and not feel attacked. And he even understands like where I'm at. So heck, maybe he's on the clergy project. I don't know, but it's that's been good. It's been helpful but then at the same time, it's been difficult because it makes me want to make an argument that I can stay within this belief system logically and reasonably. And I'm just having a hard time doing that more and more. I thought we had better arguments. I don't know. I've watched hundreds and hundreds of hours in the last year of debates and discussions. I'm not a big fan of official debate. I like what's that channel? Modern Day Debates. I like how they structure it. But I've watched hundreds of hours of debates and discussions on politics and religion and everything. And every single time I see a theist, whatever flavor, make their arguments, I don't know. They just aren't compelling anymore. They fall flat. And I just don't know what to do about that. Like I grew up. So here's a what did I call it? A vestigial organ of my faith. There's an extremely kind of amazing coincidence that happened. I used to think that I was healed. I used to think that my feet, I grew up in the charismatic. I mean, it was nuts. It was nuts. You had people lying on the floor, birthing the new move of God. Grown men with their legs spread, moaning and groaning, birthing the new move of God, whatever the heck that means. Like, that's what I came out of for the first 21 years of my life. and nuts. So I was convinced that I got healed as a kid, because I thought I was, up until like less than a year ago. I thought I was, and that was a big holdover. Like, man, I can't deny that there's something, right? Um, but it turns out I actually Googled the issue. I was pigeon-toed as a kid. I Googled the issue, and typically you grow out of it, but it's also possible that, pigeon-toed is where your feet turn in. I don't know if you know that. You typically grow out of it on your own, but you can also retain the habit of walking that way. And so you could no longer structurally need to walk that way, but you just do. And so it's a perfectly reasonable explanation that I had done it out of habit. And then when I was 12 or 13 or whatever, in the fervor of this healing service that was going on, I got prayed for, and all of a sudden I'm healed, right? Like, if there's a reasonable explanation, then by definition, it can't be a miracle. It's, why would you go to default? Why would you default on that? Now, there is a coincidence that's pretty compelling. We ended up at the church we're in randomly. A friend brought us there, a friend who had kind of shown me the craziness of the theology that I was involved in. And he brought us there, and we started going, and it was extremely traditional. Like, at the time, it was like jean skirts and whatnot, and homeschooling. And my wife calls her grandmother, who lives in New Jersey, and she tells her we're going to a new church. And her grandmother's like, "What church is it? What's it called? Who's the pastor?" And she tells her the pastor's name, and she starts flipping out on the phone, because it turns out that there's a woman that her grandmother spoke to. Her name was Viola. They would talk all the time, and I remember going down to Jersey and hearing them talk on the phone. Viola lives in Missouri, right? But they would talk about the crazy stuff that we were involved in, and they would pray that we would go to a specific church in our town that the Missouri lady's nephew pastored. We had no idea. They never told us that they were praying this stuff, and we ended up going to that church. I mean, it's in my town, but I'd never heard of it. So, and it's been hugely impactful in a lot of good ways. So there is that. I'm sort of hung up on that a little bit. Like, it does feel, yeah. So I guess some Socratic questioning might be useful in that. I think you're on mute.
Silly me. Yeah, my dog tends to make a bunch of noise, and I try to ride the mute button just in case he goes off. So anyway, you mentioned that you wanted to believe. There was aspects of the supernatural that I wanted to believe when I was young, but for whatever reason, the notion of God didn't have a lot of appeal to me. I couldn't make the universe make sense with Christianity as a model.
Right.
And I remember my son going through the same thing when he was about 5, and I knew that that he was having the same dissonance that I was. He asked me, "How does God just make stuff?"
Right.
And I could appreciate the way that he asked me the question, because he scanned down the hall to make sure that the religious person who'd been teaching him all day couldn't hear the question. So I could see where he was going with that. A 5-year-old kid, how does God just make stuff? And I knew the answer he needed. So I leaned down and I said, he didn't. And I could see a wave of relief wash over him and now the universe doesn't have this thing that doesn't fit anymore.
Right.
And now it can all make sense. So there were things that I wanted to believe, even if I couldn't reconcile them. But it ultimately just became a matter of what can I show to be true, because I don't want to be fooled into believing anything that is not evidently true.
Right.
So what was it? What is it that you wanted to believe, and why?
I want to believe because, I mean, honestly, it comes down to, like, it just seems like a good bet. That's where I keep landing, and that's not a foundation for faith at all. But I want to believe because I mean it's everything. It's all I've ever known, right? It's all I've ever known. It's the only friends I've ever had in my entire life have come from a conservative Christian background and current belief system.
So
And
you want to continue to belong. You want to continue to resonate the way you
I
always
don't want to disappoint as well. That's a big part of it. I know when I left the crazy church that I was a part of, I guess all churches are kind of crazy, but this was particularly crazy. When I left that, it was a big shock. And if there's anybody, I don't know how many people will see this, but it's possible that people will be shocked to see this. I don't know. It's kind of like if they're watching this though, they probably won't admit it. So I'm probably safe.
Yeah, I heard the joke that if you take a Mormon fishing with you, he'll drink all your beer. But if you take 2 Mormons with you, then you'll have all your beer to yourself.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. But leaving that ideology and that theology was really painful. I felt like an idiot. I felt duped. And I'm just having similar feelings. And I just have to ask that question of like, yeah, the claims that I grew up with were insane. But the reality is they're not all that different than the current claims. Like it's just different in scale and repeatability. And I don't know what to do with that. It's just I can't point to a miracle anywhere, nowhere, not a single one. And I started asking questions. I have 4 kids. My youngest is 2, and he has really, really bad asthma. In the last 15 months, he's been to the hospital 6 times. It's very troubling. And I started, you play stuff over in your head. I drive for a living, so I have a lot of time to think. And I was like, what would I do if something actually happened? Like if the worst happened, how would I feel? Like what questions would I ask my pastor or God? And I think my question would be, why did we pray? Why did we pray? And like, because we don't actually see physical miracles happening. We don't actually, no one is pointing to it. There's no better outcome for people who pray. And in fact, the study shows that it's, if you're being prayed for, the outcome is slightly worse. So why are we doing it? This seems like a kind of silly thing to do. Why would I ask God to intervene in the physical world when I never see him do it?
There's another logical quandary with that too. If God knows everything, then doesn't he know before you ask what you're going to ask for? Has he already decided what the answer is? So what's the point in even asking?
Right.
And so it occurs to me that every religion wants you to pray in one way or another. And whether you're praying to the ancestors, your dead ancestors, or to your animal totem, or to a collection of gods, or to an alien mind who's listening to you telepathically, whatever the hell it is, it occurs to me that if you talk to an imaginary thing long enough, it will start talking back.
Right.
And I often use the example of a volleyball with a bloody handprint on it from that movie, The Island.
Castaway.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's talking to a volleyball,
right.
And he's here, and it's talking back to him, and that'll happen with anything. It really will. You just psych yourself up for it enough, and you're gonna have that personal relationship. And Christians talk about how they're the only ones with a personal relationship, except that I've talked to Muslims who think that they have that with Allah.
Right.
And of course, Hindus, George Harrison of the Beatles famously talked about his personal relationship with Lord Krishna. And all of this is born from chanting the mantras and praying so that you keep the God ever present in your mind, talking to him like he's really there. And in George Harrison's case, it wasn't just that the God talked back. It wasn't just that George Harrison could hear the God audibly, but that he could also see him. And I know somebody else who worships, I'm not even joking, I know somebody who worships the Egyptian cat-headed goddess Bastet.
I think I heard about, not you didn't tell me about that. I think I heard you talk about that. Like this
Yep.
thing showed up, right? In
Yep. She
his,
appeared in his house and spoke to him, and he could see her and touch her and all of that.
well, good for him. But the response from like the Christian perspective would be, well, of course, because they're demons. Like, of course, like it's all, they're being shown the other side, and it's a counterfeit to the real thing, which is God. But the problem is, why is the dark side much, much more willing to reveal itself to you and allow and show up, and you just don't get that on the other side? It just doesn't. I mean, that's probably flawed logic, I guess, but it's, I don't know,
I
that doesn't
wanted to
seem.
share another personal experience. When I was a little kid, I want 5 to 8, somewhere in there. And my mother is telling me about the devil, and I have a hard time understanding why. What is the devil's motivation? What does he get out of anything?
Hmm.
Why does he want my soul? Is he going to be the one torturing me in hell? Is he just really sadistic? I mean, why does he want to fool me? Why does he want to? What does it matter whether I believe something or not? I can never understand why so I have a completely different perspective of Satan now than I did before. But I was never able to conceptualize the devil character the way Christians cast him, because that character just doesn't make any sense.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've asked the question in the past. It was one of the dangerous questions that I very quickly ignored. But like, was the devil was given his own domain and kingdom, right? Like, was he really being punished? What was his punishment? Like, what did he do? Obviously, I could say what he did wrong, I guess, but what did he suffer for it? Like, is he down there suffering with people in hell, or is he directing it? Um, and there can't seem to be a middle ground there. Um,
Now, Christians often tell me that Satan is not in hell. I don't know where that concept came from.
oh, he roams the earth to and fro like a lion looking to
Yeah,
devour those. Right, right, right.
yeah, and eventually, and the Muslims have a very similar belief that the devil is wandering the earth, and that eventually the devil will be cast into hell. Except in the Muslim version, when God threatened everybody, says we're going to have this day of judgment, and I'm going to throw everybody into hell, and Iblis, who is Satan in Islam, um, he wanted some sort of rebellion. For what? We know the futility of it. Certainly Iblis, Satan, would know how futile it is to stand against God, and this character would have to have seen himself as an immortal, so he knows that you're going to be in tortured a hell of a lot longer than you're alive, even if you're an immortal, right? So what are you waiting to have? A few centuries, thousands of years, maybe, and then millions of eternities after that, you're going to be constantly roasting. But for whatever reason, the devil character offered an option to God. Well, let me turn as many people away from you as I can in the time that I have. And God says, oh, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So he let him do it.
Right.
Just like it's every bit as ridiculous as the story of Job.
Yeah. Yeah. And if Lucifer tried to be like God and he was cast down from heaven, why was he given domain? Like, was that must have been the plan then, right? Because the only reason humans can choose to do good is if we have a bad choice, and the only bad choices, the only bad things we can do come from temptation from the devil. That seems problematic. Also, I haven't found this out yet. I don't know if you ever heard anything about it, but like the garden, they were cast out of the garden, right, to a worse place. So that place already existed. Like the worst place already was there, and they were locked out of the really good place. So who made the worst place? Who made the place that was bad? And why were they like? Was it just a just in case thing. I don't understand it. I haven't heard the argument. AIG won't touch it. That's for sure. Ken Ham. It's
Well, they're
yeah,
still making the argument that Adam brought death into the world, but
right. And
but Genesis 3, right at the end of Genesis 3, is the proof that interpretation is wrong,
why is that?
because they were given food. They were given fruit to have as meat, which was an interesting way of interpreting that, right? So you have the fruit as meat.
Right.
Well, then it says that God put right in the middle of the garden. It says that He put it in the middle of the garden. He had this tree, the knowledge of good and evil, but He also had a tree in there for the tree of eternal life. And it doesn't explain the tree of eternal life much in the beginning, but at the end of Genesis 3, it does, where God says, okay, well, they've eaten now from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now I have to get them out of the garden immediately, lest they reach out their hand and also eat of the fruit of the tree of life. Because
Right.
if they do that, then they will live forever.
And become like gods.
Meaning, and God Himself, the serpent says that you will become like God.
Right.
God then says, well, now they've eaten the fruit. Now they have become like us. And so God has made the admission as well that merely knowing good from evil makes you like a god. So what is it? A god is just a sentient or a more sapient version of other animals. But when He says that He has to get them out of there, because they're going to eat from the fruit of the tree of eternal life, well, that means that they didn't have eternal life already. I ask Christians a lot. I say, okay, well, what if Adam never ate from either tree?
Right.
If he's not going to live forever if he didn't eat of the fruit of the tree of eternal life, right?
But there's no
But what if
death.
he never ate? What if he never ate anything at all?
Right.
Because God set up all the fruit and everything he has to eat.
There's no death, so we have to make a rule that he doesn't eat something that would give him eternal life. But there's already no death. I heard, yeah.
And merely eating requires killing. That you have to. What is the definition of an animal? Is that you have an internal digestive tract, so that you have to ingest and digest living cells. Now, maybe you're not killing the entire plant that's producing the fruit, if that's the case, but you're still ingesting living cells, one way or another.
So another question I haven't really posed. I posed it to my wife. My wife it was a little rough when I started asking some questions, and I think now she's seeing like what I'm trying to do, which is I'm trying to be honest about what I believe and make sense of it. But the one question, like if there was no evil in the world and they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil, how could they be blamed for doing something wrong if they didn't know what good and evil was and they were deceived by the snake? Why are we punished for eternity because they were like, you can't have the option to do something wrong and not have what we would call a sin nature already, right? It doesn't follow. If I'm able to do the wrong thing knowingly, then I have the knowledge of good and evil. So it was already there. It falls apart so fast, and it's like, and I've heard the arguments of like, I can't make a scientific argument for that entire book, really, or many of the subsequent books. But there's the what's it called? Not literal, figurative. There's like the figurative argument of, and it's all just figurative language to try to describe the human condition.
Well, Adam and Eve is definitely metaphorical. That is,
it has to be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you have a choice. Ultimately, it's not about how they sustain, and you can eat all of these trees. Oh, don't eat of this one, even though I, the careless God, left a loaded gun in the middle of the coffee table among a bunch of children. Don't touch this. And since they're all 5-year-old children, I know I can trust that when I say don't touch this loaded gun that I left on the table, that you all will behave, right? And then God sits back in the corner and because he knows what's inevitably going to happen.
Right.
He put the trees, both of them, in the garden. You may either eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or you can eat of the fruit of eternal life. And the parable there, or the metaphor there, is that you can either become like unto gods, or you can remain as you are
Right.
for the rest of your existence. And that's clearly it's clearly we're not talking about trees that you could take an axe to and cut down. And I saw this beautiful cartoon about that, where God comes into the garden, the tree is gone, and Adam and Eve are sitting at a table, and they've got this they've got table and chairs, and they've got this cabinet for putting dishes and everything in, but they're sitting in a forest, right? So God comes in with an accusatory finger, and Adam says, "We did not eat of it. We made of it a dinette set."
Okay. That's funny. Huh. So that the physical reality of the Genesis story of, like, I heard Ken Ham, that poor man. He made an argument that the Tyrannosaurus Rex teeth are perfectly suitable for eating coconuts. Coconuts and pumpkins, he said. I guess they are. I mean, you can't argue with it, right?
And spider fangs they have venom only for eating fruit juice,
right? Sucking the fruit. That's funny.
And snakes, not just the venom, but the type of teeth that they have and the ability to constrict or inject venom or whatever it is that they do,
right?
Clearly does, and their entire digestive system would utterly fail at the notion of an apple.
Right. Well, they are able to constrict because haven't you seen the cartoons where they squeeze a banana and it flies out? Like, they have to do that. And they swallow it. They're perfectly suited for swallowing, as Ray Comfort would say. It's like they're turned right toward you. But so these different questions have just left me a bit bereft of reasons to make it make sense. And the other,
and let me be completely fair to you. Okay, so there are. It happens a lot that people will come out of extreme religiosity, and when they realize that when there's one crack in the armor of God, in the helmet of faith, or whatever the fuck that is, when there's one crack there, it all kind of comes down like a house of cards, and the believer will walk away as a total atheist. But it's not really a good reason if you're coming from a position of religious extremism, because there are Christians who are trained in science, and they fully accept evolution, and they fully accept that Adam and Eve is just a metaphor, that the global flood of Noah's Ark, that didn't really happen, that the Tower of Babel is metaphorical as well. Even rabbinical scholars admit that the Exodus never happened.
Yeah.
What's more foundational to Judaism than that story, right?
Right.
There are ways that you can get around the biblical literalism, and they'll still hold on to their beliefs, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian. Francis Collins wrote a couple of books in where he said that Adam and Eve are impossible. They are genetically impossible. We know that this didn't happen. We know that that people have evolved from apes, and from large populations, not just from a single couple. From minimum population of 10,000 people. So he's found a way that he can rationalize his belief, and he can still be an evangelical Christian, even though he doesn't believe in the story of Genesis.
Right.
So what I would invite you to do is to understand and accept that we're not just criticizing the biblical story of Genesis here.
No.
There are plenty of ways to get around the biblical literalism. You want to go for the bigger questions. The harder thing for me, I mean, it's easy enough when I get a hold of a Christian who's fundamentalist, and where disproving the Bible means disproving God, because they can't distinguish doctrine from deity. The harder thing is when they can make that distinction, when they realize that the Bible and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and everything else can be completely wrong and God could still exist. And now you've got a much harder thing. It's a higher academic level to question the existence of God when God is not dependent on the crutch that is the doctrine that people wrote.
Right. Well, I plan to reach out to people like Francis Collins, whoever is available to talk, if they're willing, and maybe read. There's a couple books by scientists, geologists, who have reconciled these ideas. Like, I can't believe in an old Earth. I mean, a young Earth. I can't believe in evolution. Is fascinating and amazing and evident, and I've really enjoyed learning about it. And there's no reason you can't wonder at creation in that process, and I'm aware of that. But there are still the theological questions that I have that are separate from the scientific ones. And that's a whole different problem, and that's what I want to find out from some Christians who, like someone like Mary Schweitzer, and just see what is their rationale. How exactly do they do it? But I mean, I guess if you can be convinced of the theological argument, then that's how, right? I mean, you're convinced that the theological argument is true. It's just using metaphors and stories about the human condition to convey the theological argument.
I think the next level is going from scriptural literalism, whether it's the Bible or the Quran or what have you, and going to the theological argument being dependent on whether Islam is true or whether Judaism is true or whether Christianity is true, one of those. Because one of the reasons that I think that Islam is growing faster than Christianity.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Islam has been for decades the fastest growing religion. And Christianity, according to some statistics that I've seen recently, that do not take into account attenuation. And none of these that are talking about the how fast these religions grow, none of them take into account that a lot of these, like when in the feared Islamification of Europe, for example, one of the things they did not take into account was that a whole lot of people that are born into European culture from Muslim families, they don't all stay Muslim.
No.
When they grow up. Well, the same thing's going on in Christianity. We've got right now, atheism is on the rise in all 50 states.
Right.
And across Europe. And we know that there's a similar thing happening even in Saudi Arabia, where atheism is deeply criminal. They know that they still have a problem with attenuation, about people growing up and realizing they don't believe this anymore.
Right.
And they either have to leave before they can ever confess their unbelief, or they're going to be very bold about it before they get arrested. But then they know that there's a problem. There's attenuation, that the religions are not holding on like they used to for a number of reasons. But when then we get into the religious argument, trying to defend whether Islam is true or Christianity is true, there's more baggage with Christianity. There's things that don't make sense about Christianity that Islam doesn't have. Islam has God. God created everything. If you believe in God, you're good. If you don't believe in God, to hell with you, literally. That's it. That's all Islam is or does. Christianity has this added complexity of with the Trinity, Trinitarian Christians especially, but then the notion that God had to kill Jesus, who in some interpretations is God, so physical manifestation of, but that's not consistent throughout. But in any case, why did Jesus have to die? What did Jesus's sacrifice supposedly even accomplish? What's the point of it? It's completely unnecessary. And people have such problems reconciling the Jesus aspect that little bit of extra baggage, they're almost identical. Islam and Christianity believe exactly the same thing, except for Christianity also has, and by the way, God killed his son because he so loved the world. that he had to kill his son to forgive, because he can do anything he wants, but he can't forgive unless you do something unforgivable first.
Hmm.
So that's why Christianity is growing slower, or is not growing at all compared to Islam.
Hmm. Hmm. So, I mean, I guess it's difficult. It's difficult for me to make the case. I've been saying this to people in my life, like, what is the argument? What if I'm talking to, well, if I'm talking to someone like you, what am I supposed to say that they don't already know? Like, I can't make a spiritual argument because there's cessationists within Christianity, tons of them. We can't even agree on whether or not God does anything. There's 45,000 denominations. Like, what is the argument? I can't make a spiritual argument. I can't make a better life argument. I can't say you won't struggle with mental health problems. I can't say you'll live longer, or you'll have prayers answered, or your kids will live, or anything. There's no guarantee other than eternity that you won't get, or you always get eternity in heaven that you won't get if you don't admit you've done bad things. But everyone knows they've done bad things. Like, what am I going to say to you that, like, you've done bad things, so you need God to forgive? And, like, you've already tried to make bad things right, like, you have a conscience. So what is the argument? What is the point? How can I argue to you that you need to accept this doctrine because you've done bad things and it's made God angry? Like, you have to believe a lot of things before you can get there. And I can't make that case. And so if I can't make the case, what can I really say I believe it?
Let me suggest to you that the reason that hell exists in Christianity and in Islam, where it really doesn't in Judaism, the reason that Christianity, it was invented for Christianity and then for Islam, was because it's easy to put that threat of a fate worse than death, and just make up all the exaggerations about how horrible it's going to be. Lake of fire in Islam is especially bad. You're going to live in a lake of fire, and you're going to have to eat poison food. You have to eat poison food to stay alive, because why do you need to eat? You're in hell. You can't die, but you have to eat anyway. Oh, and you have a house. You have a house that's also on fire, and you have to sleep in your house that's on fire while you're eating poison food. Yeah.
Oh. Wow.
And so it's just like it's so ridiculous. But the problem is, you have to have the hell. You have to have the threat there, because otherwise, if you didn't have hell, if you just had death, if we're all just going to die, the lights go out, we go off, whatever. That's preferable to spending an eternity that never ends. There's no escape. There's no way to make it stop. You can't, as Christopher Hitchens said, that heaven is a celestial North Korea, except that you can at least die and leave North Korea.
Right.
With heaven, there's no escape.
Right.
There's no way to. It's just going to go on and on.
And
there's no way. You can't constantly ascend. There's no way that you keep upping the levels. There's no way. Eventually, eternity. It's gonna get boring. It's gonna get tedious. It's gonna be something you want to escape, and people will start thinking, that the initial excuse, the reason that my grandmother gave me about what's great about heaven, we all get a mansion and the streets are made of gold. I kid you not. That was her explanation.
Right.
My 10 or 11-year-old self responded, why would I need a mansion? Why would I need a house at all?
Right.
In heaven? And gold streets are not really efficient. And why would I need streets? What's the value in having them being made out of gold?
Well, there's also the land of milk and honey. So that works if you like that. Yeah, if the wages of sin is death,
mm-hmm.
and we die, have the wages been paid? I guess I don't fully understand that.
If the wages of sin are death, and I've sinned, then I'm going to die. Okay.
Right.
And I think that's how it should be. I would rather that. I would rather I would rather pay, if I had to, I would rather there be wages paid so that I could die, so that I could get out of the eternity part.
Right.
'Cause I asked a prayer when I was 12 to get out of that,
Hmm.
because I just couldn't imagine spending absolutely forever in the company of an indomitable despot that with which I disagreed, because I was trying to read the Bible, and the Bible paints God as a monster.
Hmm.
So my prayer was asking God to either explain how the Bible got him all wrong, or if the Bible is correct, then how do you justify all of that atrocity and idiocy that is attributed to God in the Bible? And that if he couldn't do either, then he could not have my soul. That was the ultimatum of the prayer
Hmm.
when I was 12. And I knew
Right.
that I was damning myself, because I still believed in hell. For a good year longer than that, I still believed in hell.
Right. Hmm. And so if what was my line of thinking? I guess if oh, right. So every time I talk about some of these questions with people, um, it's frustrating because all of a sudden out comes a brand new doctrine that I've never heard of before to explain it. And which, okay, cool. Like all of a sudden it's it's annihilation. It's not an eternity in hell. So that's death, right? Um, and it's metaphorical in the Old Testament, and it's actually describing evolution because everything comes from the earth. And I'm like, how am I supposed to land on something that's true when there's so many diametrically opposed views? Like, how can I ever claim that? There's somebody I was talking to who they were warning me about being careful about science because they all have their biases, and they're operating always under an assumption first. That's what they do. And I said, if I can't trust science, if I can't trust what I see, how could I possibly make a, a claim of truth about philosophy or religion? How can I do that? Like it's not, if you're so dubious of science, how are you so certain about faith? Because one, you're saying they have no evidence, and this one, you're saying we don't need it. So it doesn't. I don't.
I
I
need to
don't.
interject an important point here. The practice of science, the way that it's done, is designed to minimize bias as much as possible.
Right. Right. It has to be. That's something I've learned. Like I was very distrustful. I wasn't like a super young Earth person. I didn't really care. I was actually an old Earth person just because it made more sense to me. But I didn't think about it too much because I didn't want to. Um, but like my pastor's an old Earth guy, and he's warm to the idea of evolution. Um, but uh, the more I look into it, the less it actually does make sense with a faith view. Like you have to have billions of years and hundreds of thousands at least years of time where there was no Judaism or anything, right? Um, and yeah, and then moving into like the Old Testament atrocities, um, like the Midianites, like the Canaanites, they like to say that they weren't really fully human, right? But the Midianites, they were people, and they just slaughtered them, and they gathered up the kids, and then they killed all the little boys, the young boys, and they kept all the little girls who were virgins and slaughtered their mothers apparently. How do I reconcile that? I can't do it. I can't. It's and I've had arguments with people, and disturbingly, a number of times it comes down to, well, how long were they going to live anyways, right? Like seriously, that's the argument. Like they weren't going to live long, and compared to an eternity. And I said, well, do we value life or not? Like, are we pro-life or not? Is it a tragedy for a kid to die or no? Like, uh, it's just impossible to get around.
In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna is telling King Arjuna that he needs to fight against his own family and kinsmen and friends. Arjuna is going to lay down his arms. He says he doesn't believe in war, and he's not going to fight this war. He's just going to let these people kill him rather than raise a blade to the people he loves. And I admired that character. This is how the Bhagavad Gita begins. But then Lord Krishna, the multi-armed form who created everything, who created the Godhead, all of the gods stem forth from Lord Krishna, because in this version, Krishna is Brahma, but Brahma is Krishna somehow. And it's the same way that Jesus is God and God is Jesus somehow.
Huh.
The Hindu Trimurti is very similar to the Christian Trinity. But anyway,
You said
Krishna says that, or yeah, and Krishna says that you have to kill these people. You have to wage these war, and it won't matter that you're killing your family and your friends and all of that, because you're just killing their bodies.
Right.
Okay, so it no longer matters whether we kill people, and they'll be reincarnated, and if they're really good, to be reincarnated as cows. And we can't eat beef because that would mean killing a cow, but wouldn't that just be killing its body?
Mm-hmm. And if it
Get
doesn't
people
matter,
to think about their religious perspectives, it's almost impossible for some.
and if it doesn't matter, the question I've asked is, why are we against abortion? Like, if they're guaranteed to go to heaven and they're going to spend eternity there versus 75 years here on earth, why do we care? I mean, it seems like it would be logical to launch a bus full of 2-year-olds off of a cliff and call that ministry, right?
Yeah, and then
It wouldn't be right.
there's a number of things the Bible says about abortion too, and most obviously is Numbers 5,
Right.
where if you suspect your wife of cheating on you, then God wants you to get an abortion, and God will participate and make that happen.
Right. So that I did read about it. There's another explanation, I guess, because you can interpret it as like when her womb falls, it's actually her thigh, and like it's a bizarre, like it's hard work to believe it. And that I just shake my head. I don't know. It's so hard to be dogmatic about this stuff. And I don't want to be a dogmatic, like anti everything Christian. I want to be gracious, and there's a lot of grace that's been extended to me, and kindness, and I mean, I was just 3-4 years ago, I was deeply depressed. Like, I was not long for life. I would have not been around for probably 6
Can I
months.
ask, was this a medical situation, or was this just life circumstances getting to you?
It was depression. I deal with it for sure.
So it is a medical
Yes,
thing?
but
Yeah.
it was also very much circumstantial, and
Okay.
like coming out of that church and the disappointment in myself and the disappointment in the world. Like, everyone has this super amazing calling and destiny, right? And then I'm like, oh, that's all crap. Like, here I am, a truck driver, and I was sinning, and I was like, I just hated myself. And my doctor, I mentioned something about it to my doctor, and she's like, I think you might be depressed. I was like, no, I just hate myself. Because I'm stupid and lazy and impulsive, and I make bad decisions, and I'm not. I just hate myself. That's all it is, and I have good reason. Like, that's not depression. That would be irrational. But it was very much depression, and thankfully, this again, my pastor was a voice of reason for me in that, and really encouraged me to get help. And it's been since, and this is kind of the irony of it, is like, since getting my brain right, I've been able now to really think about this stuff. I'm not holding on to it out of like guilt and desperation, really, and hope. I'm actually analyzing it and seeing if it holds up. Yeah.
I apologize. I got people coming in and out of the door. We're going to have to close up here real quick. But I want to tell you that I appreciate your tone and your endeavor. The whole goal of it, I appreciate. And I want to see where you go with it. I wanted to throw out one last thing, is that I find that people's belief in God kind of dissipates if they can't be like unto gods themselves. And I don't mean that as being in terms of understanding right from wrong, but the whole thing about mind-body dualism, the idea that when your body dies, that there's some supernatural aspect within it that continues on.
Right.
There's, from what I'm hearing from neuroscientists and philosophers, there's no support for that. We don't have souls.
Right.
So the whole issue about where you go when you die is a moot question. We simply shut off.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm more and more okay with that. Honestly, it's not all that scary. But yeah, I appreciate what you do, and you are somebody. I feel like I saw you when I was young. I'm 30, so I was probably like 12 or 15 or something, and I was like, I don't know, it might have been somebody looking like you, but I was like, that's an atheist. That's what they look like. They're scary. It's so obvious. I don't want to go that route. Like it was super judgmental, but leaning in and listening to you and to Matt and to all of these people, like I've spent a ton of time. I do want to ask about some evolutionary questions at some point. Maybe I could email them to you.
We can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the conversation and the honesty. I really, really do.
I appreciate yours. This is such a big deal to me that religion is not honest at all, and that's my biggest problem with it.
You might be right. I mean, I'm seeing it more often. So, yeah, I'll let you go. I gotta get the kids to bed and head to work. So,
thank you, Ben. Best of luck in your journey.
Take care.